Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I stumbled across another bodybuilding.com article that was just terrible. And this time, I didn't actually have someone send me this one. I didn't go looking for it because people have been sending them to me. It came through my Facebook feed as a sponsored link. So bodybuilding.com paid to promote this. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about this. And let's remember, guys, bodybuilding.com is not only the #1 supplement company in the world. They have also been fined $7 million by the FDA for illegally putting anabolic steroids in their drugs, and that is public record, to which their CEO pled guilty of. And I believe they fined him $100,000. I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that one, so don't quote me there. But I know the company got fined $7 million for this, and then he got fined separately. So, you know, we're not talking about a company known for its ethics, even though they're the biggest out there. So again, we know a lot about them at this point. I mean, it's all publicly documented stuff. Now, as far as this article goes, they have an article explaining how to use bands to gain muscle and strength as an amazing tool. You know what, guys? I like bands. I think bands have their place in training. I recommend bands for all sorts of athletes. All right, for particularly anyone who needs power, speed. You guys saw me recommend bands for boxers, for MMA fighters last week. I absolutely recommended them. However, using them for general hypertrophy, all right, this is problematic. And again, this is someone trying to make something into something that it is not, who doesn't understand the purpose of bands. And I mean, I'll cover the purpose of bands in a minute of why they're so damn effective for certain things. But for what he's talking about as an overall hypertrophy tool just to gain muscle, I don't think so. And, you know, he broke it down of saying that, look, they changed strength curves. He talked about a descendant versus descendant strength curves, you know, because in no exercise is the amount of work you have to do equal through the entire range of motion. It isn't. Different muscles get worked to different degrees at different points. And, you know, the thing is, with a compound movement, you might actually find that some muscles work harder at the top than they do at the bottom, and other muscles work differently. So it gets really complicated to make a statement like that with big compound movements. But, you know, he covered it with a couple different things. He said some have a strength curve to where, you know, they're strongest in the middle and you do the least work and the bottom at the top like a barbell curl. All right, that already tells us something right there. If you're doing a barbell curl is what? It's an isolation movement, right? Isolation movement means you move only one joint because you're trying to make only one muscle work. And if two joints are involved in any exercise, multiple muscles are working. Common sense. The only reason anyone finds the barbell curl easier at the top is because they're not performing a barbell curl. They're performing some exercise that allows them to cheat to use more weight. What do I mean? Because the hardest part of a curl is the top. Look, this is the hardest part of a curl. It's right there. If you come higher than this, your bicep's not working anymore. People curl up high because it lets them lift more weight because they're moving the weight differently so that the hardest part of the range of the motion is no longer at the top. They're taking the hardest part out and letting their shoulders and everything take over and adding an extra joint and adding several new muscles. All right, that's not performing a curl for the biceps. So he said a curl, but it's like a curl is a single joint movement. It should be hardest at the top unless you're doing some sort of weird preacher curl. But that's a little different. But most curls performed correctly should be hardest at the top. Unless you're cheating and involving another joint, turning it into a compound movement. You know, kind of funny guys will do that, but then they want to argue that compound movements aren't the best for a muscle like the bicep, but they'll turn a curl into a compound movement. Funny how that works. But this person doesn't seem to know that, but I'm going to leave that alone because let's talk about the real issue here, the bands. The bands. Now, he didn't mention anything about speed strength, overspeed eccentrics, changing your deceleration curve, any of that stuff that people use these things for power because they want to punch faster, throw faster, kick faster. All right, he didn't discuss any of that stuff. He's discussing the strength curve so that you build more muscle. You know, a perfect example he gives on the bench press or the squat. He used a squat. Perfect example. He's saying the squat is hardest at the bottom, right? And you can do bands so that the muscles have to work harder at the top so that you can do more work on every rep on the exercise. All right, I want you to think about that for a minute because the whole point is doing more work. More work is generally how you recruit muscle fibers. That's generally how you grow. There's no argument there. But he made a big mistake and said, but the thing is, you still have resistance at the bottom. You might only be adding 100, 150 at the top, and the resistance gets higher as you go up. So the muscle is only having to work so hard at the bottom. They're having to do less work at the hardest part, and then more work where it's easier, so that you're working somewhat equally hard all the way through the exercise, but you still gain strength in the bottom. No, you don't. That's where the guy messed up. He doesn't understand. You're actually reducing the weight during the hardest part of the exercise. You're not doing more work. What you are doing is forcing a higher work threshold through the easier parts. But you know what that means? You're also going to do less total reps. Meaning, when you start looking at total band resistance and resistance done, normally you're limited on a squat because of the bottom. Right? That's going to be what's going to determine your 1 rep max. That's what's going to determine your 5 rep max. The hardest part of the exercise where you do the most work. If you add more work to the easier parts of the exercise, you're going to be able to do way less reps with the same weight. Now, people can argue, well, but it's a longer strength curve. It's a longer strength curve, so you do more work. Well, it's all probably balancing out then, because it's still about the total amount of work that the muscles can do. All right, think on that for a moment. If it's a total amount of work that the muscles can do, you're still doing the same total amount of work. If you were to calculate it up, you're doing the same amount of work for doing them with bands with the accommodating resistance. If you were to figure out how much work was done through every inch of the range of motion, the weights, reps, everything, you're still going to do approximately the same sort of work. You know what that means? You're going to stimulate the same amount of muscle growth. You're not going to stimulate more growth by doing this. All right, just like I've said with the blood flow restriction training, I haven't seen any evidence yet that you're going to gain more muscle from doing it. So if you're going to add a complexity to an exercise that requires more equipment, requires more setup, because I'm going to be honest, guys, setting up bands correctly takes extra time. It's pretty easy to just come set pins on a squat rack and add weight and ramp up and do it. It's a lot more work to put bands on. All right, there is a potential risk to it. People do get hurt by bands. Bands do snap and hit people in the face. There are accidents when bands break, when bands come loose. They do have a higher risk curve. It's not an enormous risk curve, but they add additional risk. They add additional cost, and they add additional complexity. It will take you more time to work out because you have to mess with the bands, set them up, get the tension right. You've got to hook them, unhook them. It can be a lot of work, and doing it correctly, when you start changing weights around with bands, you have to end up pulling the bands back off every time because you're supposed to put them on the outside of the plates most of the time, unless you're going to run them inside on the bar. Bands can be a lot of work, and I know because I have trained with bands. I've done overspeed eccentrics. I've done dynamic effort work with bands. I've done it on camera for you guys back in the UK. All right, I'm very familiar with band training. It adds an extra degree of complexity, and the whole point is the way he's using the bands isn't going to give you any more growth stimulation. And when the guy's going to say, and it'll still let you develop your strength at the bottom, no, it won't. You're still going to be limited by your speed strength out of the bottom. So if you only train with bands, let's say you're doing normal sets of 5 reps with bands, and your 5 rep max is 315 without bands, and you end up having to do less at the bottom. Let's say you put 250 on and then band tension, and you get down to almost no tension at the bottom, and you end up only doing sets of 5, because that's probably going to be about right. Meaning if your 5 rep max is 315 on a squat, and you put a decent amount of band tension on there, you might only be able to do 250 out of the bottom for the 5 reps. So actually what you're going to find is that your squat, if that's how your training, is going to get weaker out of the bottom. You're actually going to lose strength. And I know this from having done band work. If you were to do band work for all your work sets, your max squat's probably going to go down. You are going to lose strength out of the bottom. Band work is done as a secondary form of exercise. It is never, ever your primary training for any big lift. And the way he's having people do it is not going to make you work harder. It's not going to make you grow any faster than conventional training. And here's what I would say: if you want to work harder on every rep, all right, this is going to be amazing for people. Do you want to do more work on every rep? Add 5 pounds to the bar. You're now doing more work on every rep. So he's claiming this is a way to do more work through the rep, but it's not. Adding weight to the bar makes you do more work on every rep if you use the same form. All right, that's a lot less complex and a lot less extra injury than hooking all the bands up and dealing with this. The reason bands are used is for overspeed eccentric training, meaning because the bands can force you to do really fast negatives, it trains you to learn how to do fast negatives and reverse out of the bottom on exercises. All right, it helps you learn to recruit a stretch reflex on non-stretch reflex exercises. All right, because it forms an equal reaction the other way your nervous system does. Bands are there to make you faster. They're there to increase speed, strength, and explosiveness. And you usually do band work with fairly light weights. The other reason you use bands is when people have had a bad habit of training a bad strength curve. Like let's say you did bodybuilding style bench press for a long time and you always skip the lockout. You have trained yourself, you've trained your nervous system to slow down sooner on the bench press. So when you actually need to lock out for whatever reason, let's say you need to lock out because you want to go do a powerlifting meet. You've spent years training yourself to decelerate sooner. You're going to find that when you get to a heavy weight, you've trained a faster deceleration curve. You're also going to find that let's say you want to throw a punch and lock your elbow out at the end. You've trained yourself to slow down closer to the lockout. All right? That's how you've trained your body to respond when you're pushing force. And that's how it's going to respond. So you're going to actually lock out weaker on a punch. Bands are there to change your deceleration curve also because they force you to continue to accelerate to lift a weight explosively. Bands are used only for extremely fast reps, all right, speed work. And when you're forcing yourself to move a weight as quickly as possible and you have to go against band resistance, it forces you to continue to accelerate all the way to the lockout of an exercise. What does that mean for someone who needs speed? Well, it means for a power lifter, they're going to have a harder lockout. They're not going to slow down as much as they get near the lockout if they've trained themselves to have a slow lockout. You can reverse that bad habit using bands. It's a correction tool. For someone who needs to lock out faster and harder on a punch, for some sort of contact sport, combat sport, MMA fighter, boxer or something, band work on their pressing can train them to continue to accelerate all the way to the lockout for a faster punch. But to state that they make you work harder because of the strength curve, that you're going to develop more muscle mass, that is simply not true, because you're still going to be limited on the amount of work you can do on any given 5 or 6 rep set by the total resistance through the whole curve and the amount of work done. It's not going to let you work any harder than you do on a normal set, because just because you do most of the work during the hardest part of a rep doesn't mean that you're not working or recruiting maximum muscle fibers. You do that even on a normal lift. All right, a normal squat, when you're going all the way down and back up, when you hit a 5 rep max or an 8 rep max or whatever, you have maximally worked. That's all you have. Adding bands so that you can do less at the bottom and more at the top doesn't let you do actually more work. It won't recruit more muscle fibers. It just means that with the same resistance, you're going to do less reps. If you ended up doing more work on each rep, you'll just do less reps. It's not actually going to do what he's describing. So again, this is another one of those ridiculous bullshit articles of someone who's misusing a very valuable training tool just to create something novel and new and convince you that basic normal training isn't going to put maximum size on you, when basic normal training is more than capable of getting you to your absolute potential. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.